Good morning, Molly. It's Mrs. Jansen, and we are back to another art lesson. I hope you have had a lot of fun with your penguins, and we are going to be starting a totally different kind of project this week. We are going to talk a little bit about an artist named Paul Klee, and we're going to look at some of his artwork and create a piece of art that is inspired by him. So if you look at this collage that I have in front of us, this is in the style of Paul Klee with lots of different shapes, bright colors, all built together so that it creates a village, and then we have kind of a dark sky with a sun or the moon in the center. This is styled and inspired after his castle and sun painting. So before we get started on this collage, I want to introduce you to this artist, Paul Klee. We'll look at a couple of his art pieces, and then we are going to get started on one half of making this. We will spend 2 lessons creating this collage. Paul Klee is a painter from Switzerland, which is in Europe, which is kind of on the other side of the globe. He was a trained graphic artist. He went to art school, and then he worked as an artist who did illustrations, made pictures for books, but he also became a teacher at the school that he had gone to, and he became a full-time painter. He painted, and when you look at some of these paintings, you think, well, what is that? That looks like a bunch of shapes, but that doesn't necessarily look like anything I see every day. He painted in a style that's called abstract expressionism. He lived about 100 years ago in the early 1900s. The paintings that he did in this style because the camera had just been invented, and so they didn't need painters to be able to paint photographically anymore. So as a painter, you really started exploring things for more than wanting them just to look real. So this portrait you can see of him, you can just mostly see lots of shapes. It's not how he looked because you saw his photograph, but it is how he painted himself. And so you can see he broke everything down into shapes. So we've got this round circle for a head, we've got a triangle over his eye, we've got curved lines and straight lines and squares and rectangles that he's put together to create a portrait. In this one, which is the red balloon, again, you can see, you're guessing maybe what this actually is. Because of its title, you're thinking, well, this must be a balloon. Maybe these are buildings in the background. But they're so simple and simplified, they just look like shapes. Now this painting, The Castle and the Sun, I hope this looks familiar. This is our inspiration for the collage that we are going to work on together. And we are going to be using a bunch of different shapes to create our own villages. And I'm going to show you, this is a student project here where you can see how they built this all together and put it together to create a Paul Klee inspired collage. So I hope you're excited to make patterned paper with me and cut out lots of shapes so we can make our own castle and villages. So Molly, the first thing that we're going to do is take our paper, have all of our markers out. So I have the Crayola markers that are just the big, thick ones. I realized when I was pulling my markers out that I didn't have any green ones. So I just went through my kids' Crayola markers and pulled out some green ones. You do not have to use these big, thick ones. You can use any of the markers that you have at your house. So, but they do need to be water soluble. This is the time when we do not want Sharpies. So Crayola are all washable. So whatever kind of marker you have, you want your washables. For the Paul Klee inspired buildings, our own sun and castle, collages, we are going to start by working on creating some different patterns on our paper that will cut into shapes later. So today, the part that we are going to be working on is creating that textured and fun patterned background, and then we'll be cutting it into shapes and gluing it into buildings next week. I sent home a couple sheets. You just want to work with one at a time. If you need to protect the surface that you are going to be using your markers on, you can get an extra sheet of paper to go underneath yours to make certain that it doesn't bleed over the edge. But we are using washable markers. If it does come off the edge onto the table, you can always clean it off. I want you to go ahead and choose one color from all of the markers that you have in front of you. And my suggestion to you is just to kind of follow me for the first couple, so you can kind of get an idea of making patterns, and then later on you can design some of your own patterns. I started with purple, and purple is a really nice dark and bright color, but I want to contrast it. I'm going to contrast it by changing the color. Now, the complementary color of purple is yellow. That means that the color that are across each other from each other on the color wheel, that's what complementary colors are. They always make a really nice contrast. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of purple and yellow back and forth. I have my purple lines standing up, so they're going vertical, and I'm going to make my yellow lines laying down, which means, of course, that they're horizontal. So I will put those on. I'm going to do these all the way up my paper in a column. You do not have to be really precise while we're working on these projects, because we are going to actually be taking water and a paintbrush and moving the colors and marks from our markers. We're going to be moving those around. So this doesn't have to be, really precise. But I'm just repeating that basic concept of vertical purple line. So my next column, I'm going to do a different color. I've chosen my pink, which I think comes out kind of red. But this time I'm going to do wavy lines. And I want a contrasting color, so I'm going to do blue in between, but I'll keep doing the wavy lines. Next column, I'm going to take my orange, and I'm just going to do some spirals. I don't know if you remember, Molly, the first lesson that we did together was all about lines. And so this is just a review of some of those lines that we worked on. So this is my red, and you can see it's barely darker than that pink. In this last little section of my paper, I'm going to try out some of these greens that I pulled out. I suspect, oh, this one works great. I think I'm going to stick with just doing green, but I'm going to do a couple of the different shapes we've already done. I'm actually going to do 2 markers at once and do my my horizontal lines. So there's the green. So we have our first page done. So instead of starting on our next sheet, before we do that, we really want to see how our markers are going to move around and spread. So you want to grab probably your larger, whatever brush that you have is larger. I've got these flat ones here, so I'm going to dip it in my water, and I'm just going to slowly add water to my markers and see how much spreading I get. It takes a little while, and some of the colors don't bleed as much as the others do, but you can start to see that that blue is moving into the white space. You can see that as I've gotten the paper wet, slowly in some of the areas, like in here, you can hardly see the swirl anymore. You just see that orange that has spread out. Same thing down here with my purple. You can see how it's spreading out around the lines that were initially there. You can see that as well with the blue. We're going to let this sheet of paper dry, and we'll be coming back to this next week once it's all dry, because we'll be cutting it up into a lot of fun shapes for our buildings that we will be creating. You can also see on my desk how all of those colors have soaked in to the paper and they're left over. So we want to do one more sheet. You can think about the colors that you liked, how they spread, colors that maybe you want next to each other, how close you want them together. I'm going to try a couple of my colors right touching each other and see how that spreads once I get them wet. But I want you to go ahead, Molly, come up with your own patterns and designs and fill up this whole sheet of paper. Molly, once you have your paper all the way filled, we're going to go ahead and use our water and do the same thing we did to our last sheet. You can see I only used vertical and horizontal lines, but I put the colors really close together. So let's see how different that is once we get it wet. If that changes how the markers look once they get wet. I'm just going to drip some water on top of the markers while I get ready to use my brush. It's kind of fun seeing what the marks of the dripped water do. Some of the dripped areas, I'm just gonna keep adding a little bit of water, but I don't want to smear it around because I like the effects of those circle drops. Molly, we're going to let this sheet of paper sit, and we are going to let it completely dry. We'll be cutting up our paper into rectangles and squares and half circles and triangles so that we can make them into buildings. If you had so much fun making these 2 sheets of paper and you want to do one more, I want to encourage you to go ahead and do that and try applying the water in different ways with different patterns with your paper. And I will see you later on. Post your progress on Seesaw so I can see how your sheets turn out. And I look forward to doing the next step in our project soon.